March 8, 1604. Outside a temple in northern Kyoto, 21-year-old drifter arrives 3 hours late to face the head of Japan's most prestigious sword school. He's dressed in rags, unwashed, carrying wooden swords. The master samurai and hundreds of spectators are furious at this disrespect. But in exactly 90 seconds, this nobody will destroy a 70-year-old martial dynasty with a single devastating blow and change Japanese sword culture forever. If you're fascinated by incredible true stories from history, consider liking and subscribing, and drop a comment where you're watching from. I love hearing from viewers around the world. Thank you for being here. Now let's dive into the remarkable true story of how one man's brutal childhood shaped him into the most feared duelist in Japan's history. The man who would become known as Miyamoto Musashi was born around 1584 in Miyamoto village, in what is now Okayama Prefecture. According to historical records, his birth name was Shinmen Benosuke, and he came from a samurai family. But his story begins with tragedy. His mother, Omasa, died as a result of giving birth to him. Growing up without a mother in 16th century Japan was already challenging enough, but his father, Shinmen Musashi, made things worse. Musashi was an accomplished martial artist renowned as a master of the jite, a specialized metal weapon used by constables, and a skilled swordsman. Here's where the story gets darker. The historical sources suggest Musashi and his father had a troubled relationship. From the age of 7, Musashi was raised as a Buddhist by his uncle Dorinbo in the Shorein temple near Hirafuku. Think about this. A samurai father sends his 7-year-old son away to live with monks. This wasn't normal practice. Something had gone seriously wrong. Musashi developed eczema during infancy, which adversely affected his appearance. Combined with his unusual upbringing, this made him an outsider from the start. But living in a Buddhist monastery wasn't just about meditation and scripture. The young Musashi was learning something that would define his entire approach to combat: discipline without attachment to conventional rules. According to the Book of Five Rings, Musashi's own account, his first duel occurred when he was still 13 years old, against a samurai named Arima Kihei who fought using the Kashima Shinto Ryu style. But here's what makes this story incredible. By Western reckoning, Musashi was only 12 years old when this happened. A 12-year-old boy was about to face a grown warrior in potentially lethal combat. In 1596, Arima Kihei, who was traveling to hone his art, posted a public challenge in Hirafuku Mura. Musashi wrote his name on the challenge. Picture this moment. A wandering samurai posts a notice basically saying, "I'll fight anyone brave enough." Most adults would think twice. A 12-year-old boy steps forward. A messenger came to Dorin's temple where Musashi was staying to inform him that his duel had been accepted by Kihei. Dorin, Musashi's uncle, was shocked by this and tried to beg off the duel in Musashi's name based on his nephew's age. But Kihei refused to back down. Kihei was adamant that the only way his honor could be cleared was if Musashi apologized to him when the duel was scheduled. Think about the arrogance here. An adult warrior is demanding an apology from a child for daring to accept his public challenge. What happened next reveals everything about Musashi's character. When the time set for the duel arrived, Dorin began apologizing for Musashi, who merely charged at Kihei with a 6-foot quarterstaff, shouting a challenge to Kihei. No apology, no backing down. A 12-year-old boy with a wooden stick charges a trained swordsman. Kihei attacked with a wakizashi, but Musashi threw Kihei to the floor, and while Kihei tried to get up, Musashi struck Arima between the eyes and then beat him to death. According to detailed historical accounts, Musashi killed Kihei with a succession of 14 to 15 blows. Arima was said to have been arrogant, overly eager to battle, and not a terribly talented swordsman. But that doesn't diminish what happened. A 12-year-old had just beaten a grown man to death with a piece of wood. This first duel established something that would define Musashi for the rest of his life. Winning mattered more than style, tradition, or honor codes. As one historical analysis puts it, the killing of Arima was brutal, psychotic, devoid of any formal style or skill. His overriding principle was the purpose of any duel is to win by any means. This wasn't the elegant sword work you see in movies. This was a desperate, violent fight where a child discovered he had a talent for ending lives. And instead of being traumatized by it, he was energized. After his first kill, Miyamoto Musashi climbed the Kamo slope and left the village of Miyamoto. He would never return. Think about this decision. Most children who experience trauma seek comfort and safety. Musashi walked away from the only home he'd known and began a life of wandering and violence. But here's what separates him from just being a violent drifter. He was systematically studying every aspect of combat. Historian Kamiko writes, "For his entire life, Musashi never took a wife, cut his hair, or entered a bath." The bath detail isn't about hygiene. He believed the act of bathing put him in a vulnerable position. This is someone who lived every moment prepared for combat. No distractions, no vulnerabilities, no normal human connections that might slow him down or create weakness. At the age of 16, Musashi defeated a powerful warrior named Akiyama from the Tajima province. But by now, these weren't just random encounters. Musashi was actively seeking out the best fighters in Japan to test himself against. In 1600, he fought in the Battle of Sekigahara on the side of the Toyotomi's army of the West, the losing side in the most decisive battle in Japanese history. Despite being on the losing side, he fought bravely, and somehow managed to survive both the battle and the ensuing massacre of troops that followed it. This battle changed everything for Musashi. The aftermath left him in the position of being a masterless samurai known as a ronin, so he began to wander Japan on a type of warrior pilgrimage known as a musha shugyo. For most samurai, becoming ronin was a disgrace. For Musashi, it was liberation. No lord to serve, no rules to follow except his own, no obligations except to perfect his deadly craft. After 4 years on the road and seclusion in the mountains, Miyamoto Musashi emerged from the wilderness a greatly skilled warrior. His self-disciplined training must have been rigorous, because in 1604, at the age of 21, he walked out of obscurity into Kyoto. But Kyoto wasn't just any city. In 1604, it was the old capital city and the spiritual heartland of Japan, and Musashi had a specific target in mind. He knew if he fought and defeated the masters of one of the best sword schools, his name would become known overnight. He chose the Yoshioka school, a kind of official swordsman school for the shogun himself. The Yoshioka family had trained 4 generations of Ashikaga shoguns. They were sword nobility, and a scruffy 21-year-old ronin was about to destroy them. What happens next is extraordinary. Musashi shows real psychological insight. He doesn't just challenge them to duels. He begins psychological warfare that would make modern military strategists take notes. But those battles, and the shocking tactics Musashi used to win them, are just the beginning of a story that leads to the most famous duel in Japanese history. Because everything Musashi learned from these early fights, every psychological trick, every unconventional strategy was building toward one ultimate confrontation. By 1612, Musashi had reportedly fought as many as 60 duels and was never defeated. But there was one more opponent waiting, a master swordsman whose skill allegedly matched his own. Sasaki Kojiro, known as Demon of the Western Provinces, was a master swordsman who was born in Fukui Prefecture. Their duel would become the stuff of legend, but it would also reveal the full extent of Musashi's psychological genius and his willingness to break every rule of honorable combat to achieve victory. Before we move on, if this story is blowing your mind, hit the like button so more people can find it. Next up, how Musashi used deliberate disrespect, strategic lateness, and a wooden sword carved from a boat oar to defeat Japan's most feared swordsman, and why this duel changed his life forever. Kyoto, 1604, the cultural heart of Japan, home to emperors and shoguns for centuries. But for Musashi, walking through these ancient streets at age 21, it represented something else entirely: opportunity. He wasn't here for the temples or the culture. He was hunting the most prestigious target in Japan, the Yoshioka school of swordsmanship. Think about the audacity of this plan. The Yoshioka family had trained 4 generations of Ashikaga shoguns. They were sword nobility, one of the 8 major schools of martial arts in Kyoto, the elite Kyoryu. Legend claimed these 8 schools were founded by monks taught by a legendary martial artist on sacred Mount Kurama. But here's what makes this story even more incredible. There was already bad blood between the families. According to historical records, Musashi's father, Shinmen Munisai, had fought against a master of the Yoshioka school years earlier. Munisai won 2 out of 3 bouts in front of Shogun Ashikaga Yoshiaki, who granted him the title unrivaled under heaven. So when a scruffy ronin showed up challenging the current Yoshioka master, this wasn't just about individual honor. This was about settling an old family feud. March 8, 1604. Outside Rendaiji Temple in northern Kyoto, Yoshioka Seijiro, master of the prestigious Yoshioka school, agrees to face this unknown challenger. They set the terms: wooden swords, victory determined by a single decisive blow. But here's where Musashi reveals the psychological genius that would define his career. He doesn't just show up for the duel, he shows up late, deliberately, strategically late. Picture Seijuro's mindset. He's the master of one of Japan's most respected schools. Students, disciples, and spectators have gathered to watch him dispatch this nobody. Time passes. Still no Musashi. More time passes. The master of the Yoshioka school is being publicly disrespected. When Musashi finally arrives, Seijuro is furious. His concentration is shattered, his dignity wounded, his anger boiling over. Exactly what Musashi planned. They face off. According to multiple historical accounts, Musashi struck a single blow that hit Seijuro's left shoulder. breaking his arm and ending the fight instantly. One strike, one devastating moment that crippled not just Seijuro's arm, but his spirit. The psychological damage was so complete that Seijuro retired from warrior life and became a Zen monk. Think about that. A master swordsman trained from childhood, a leader of a prestigious school, and one encounter with Musashi made him abandon everything and seek spiritual peace instead. With Seijuro gone, leadership of the Yoshioka family fell to his younger brother, Denshichiro. Historical sources suggest Denshichiro was allegedly an even more skilled swordsman than his brother. This time, the challenge was personal and deadly. Denshichiro demanded a duel to the death. No wooden swords this time. Real steel, real consequences. The location, Sanjusangandu Temple, known for its 1,000 statues of Kannon, the goddess of mercy and compassion. Ironic setting for what was about to happen. Musashi employed the same psychological tactic. He arrived late again, but this time, when the duel began, it was over even faster than the first. According to documented accounts, Musashi killed Denshichiro instantly with a single blow to the head from his wooden sword. Wait, wooden sword against a man with real steel? This detail appears in multiple historical sources. Musashi was so confident in his abilities and psychological advantage that he used a bokken against a live blade. The message was clear. You're so mentally shaken that even with a steel advantage, you can't touch me. Two brothers, two masters of one of Japan's most elite schools, both destroyed by the same scruffy ronin using identical psychological warfare. With both adults dead, leadership of the Yoshioka clan fell to 12-year-old Yoshioka Matashichiro, Seijuro's son. A child was now responsible for avenging his father's and uncle's deaths. But the Yoshioka family and their remaining students were done playing by honorable rules. They had watched this stranger humiliate and destroy their masters. Now they wanted blood. The challenge was issued in Matashichiro's name, but this time the Yoshioka school planned something unprecedented. A coordinated ambush. They arranged for the duel to be held at night near Ichijoji Temple, beneath the famous Sagarimatsu pine tree. According to historical records, as many as 72 warriors from the Yoshioka school assembled for this encounter. Archers, musketeers, swordsmen, an entire army determined to kill one man. But here's where Musashi proved he was more than just psychologically cunning. He was tactically brilliant. Instead of arriving late as expected, he came hours early and hid nearby. When the Yoshioka forces arrived with 12-year-old Matashichiro in full armor, Musashi was already watching from the shadows. He could see exactly what they planned. Use the boy as bait while positioning dozens of armed men to surround and kill him. Most warriors would have fled. Musashi attacked. What happened next changed Japanese martial arts forever. According to multiple historical accounts, Musashi leaped from hiding and charged straight at young Matashichiro. He cut the boy down with his first sword, then immediately drew his second sword to fight his way through the shocked and startled warriors trying to surround him. This was allegedly the first time Musashi fought with two swords simultaneously, a technique that would become his legendary signature style. The tactic was born from necessity. Surrounded by dozens of enemies, he needed every advantage to survive. Historical sources suggest he killed or wounded multiple attackers before fighting his way clear and escaping through nearby rice fields. The Yoshioka school's coordinated revenge had failed catastrophically. With Matashichiro dead, the proud Yoshioka line was finished. Their prestigious school, which had trained shoguns for generations, was destroyed. According to records, they eventually closed their martial arts academy and became silk dyers, a profession the family continues to this day in Kyoto. But Musashi's destruction of the Yoshioka school had consequences beyond eliminating one rival. Word of his victories spread throughout Japan, reaching the ears of perhaps the only swordsman whose skill could allegedly match his own. Sasaki Kojiro, known as the Demon of the Western Provinces, was everything Musashi was not. Where Musashi was rough, unkempt and unconventional, Kojiro was polished, flamboyant and technically perfect. Born in Fukui Prefecture around 1585, Kojiro had trained under the legendary swordsman Toda Seigen in the Chujo-ryu style. But there was something unique about Kojiro's approach. While his master specialized in the kodachi, short sword, Kojiro had mastered the nodachi, a sword 20 centimeters longer than a traditional katana. He called his blade Monohoshizao, the laundry drying pole, because of its extraordinary length. Kojiro had developed a signature technique called Tsubamgaishi, the turning swallow cut. Named after the swift, unpredictable movements of swallows in flight, this technique involved lightning-fast directional changes that could allegedly cut down opponents who thought they had dodged the initial strike. According to historical records, by 1610, Kojiro had become so renowned that Lord Hosokawa Tadaoki appointed him chief weapons master of the Hosokawa domain in northern Kyushu. Think about this achievement. At roughly 25 years old, he held one of the most prestigious martial positions in Japan. Apparently the young Musashi, around 29 years old by this time, had heard of Kojiro's fame and specifically requested Lord Hosokawa Tadaoki to arrange a duel between them. He approached through Nagaoka Sado Okinaga, a principal vassal of Hosokawa, asking for this ultimate test of skill. This wasn't random. Musashi had systematically worked his way up Japan's martial hierarchy. First, the unknown Arima Kihei, then various travelling warriors, then the prestigious Yoshioka school. Now he wanted to face the one man whose reputation allegedly equalled his own. Lord Hosokawa agreed and set the terms. April 13th, 1612, on the remote island of Ganryujima, Funashima, in the strait between Honshu and Kyushu. The location choice was strategic. According to historical analysis, the match was probably set in such a remote place because Kojiro had acquired many students and disciples by this time. If their master lost, they would likely have attempted to kill Musashi for revenge, just like the Yoshioka school had tried. Two masters, two completely different philosophies, two approaches to the art of killing. Musashi, the unconventional strategist who used psychological warfare, arrived late to duels and broke every rule of honorable combat to achieve victory. Kojiro, the technical perfectionist who embodied traditional samurai ideals, fought with precision and grace, and represented everything refined about Japanese swordsmanship. The duel that was about to unfold would become the most famous sword fight in Japanese history. But it would also reveal the full extent of Musashi's willingness to use any tactic, no matter how controversial, to ensure he emerged victorious. What happened on that small island would forever change both men's lives. One would cement his legend as Japan's greatest swordsman, the other would die with his reputation intact, but his life ended. Next, the morning of April 13th, 1612, how a wooden sword carved from a boat oar decided the fate of two masters, and why Musashi's victory on Ganryu Island would haunt him for the rest of his life. Dawn breaks over the Kanmon Strait between Honshu and Kyushu. On a tiny speck of land called Funashima, barely 300 meters long and 100 meters wide, the most anticipated duel in Japanese history is about to unfold. Sasaki Kojiro arrives precisely at 8 a.m., exactly as arranged. He's immaculately groomed, wearing his finest clothes, accompanied by officials, students, and supporters. Think about his confidence. He's the chief weapons master to Lord Hosokawa, undefeated in countless duels, master of the legendary turning swallow cut. His weapon lies beside him, the Monohoshi Zao, the laundry drying pole, an odachi with a blade length of over 90 centimeters, compared to a normal katana's 70 centimeters. Historical records confirm this was a straight-edged weapon that, despite its length and weight, Kojiro wielded with unusual speed and precision. 8 a.m. passes, no Musashi. 9 a.m. comes and goes, still no challenger. According to multiple historical accounts, Kojiro's perfect composure slowly begins to crack. He paces the beach, his meditation is shattered. His students and officials try to reassure him, but with each passing minute his psychological state deteriorates exactly as planned. 3 hours, 3 deliberate, calculated, insulting hours of psychological warfare. Finally, around 10 a.m., a small fishing boat appears on the horizon. But here's where Musashi reveals the full extent of his strategic thinking. While Kojiro has been pacing and fuming on the beach, Musashi has been sitting in that boat calmly carving. According to documented accounts, he spent the morning fashioning a wooden sword from the boat's spare oar. But this wasn't just any wooden sword. Historical sources specify that Musashi's improvised weapon was 110 centimeters long, a full 20 centimeters longer than Kojiro's already oversized nodachi. Think about the psychological impact. Kojiro has built his entire fighting strategy around having the longest reach. Suddenly, facing a crude wooden sword that's even longer than his prized steel blade, his fundamental tactical advantage vanishes. As Musashi jumps from the boat into knee-deep water, Kojiro explodes in rage. "You're late," he snarls, drawing his sword and throwing the scabbard into the water, a gesture showing he expected this fight to end in death. Musashi's response, recorded in multiple historical accounts, cuts deeper than any blade. "If you have no more use for your sheath, you're already dead." The psychological damage is complete. Kojiro's perfect technical training, his years of discipline, his meditation practice, all shattered by one perfectly calculated insult. What happens next unfolds in seconds but represents years of strategic thinking. Kojiro, consumed by fury and desperate to end this humiliation, launches his legendary technique, the Tsubame Gaishi, the turning swallow cut. This wasn't just any sword technique. Historical descriptions suggest it mimicked the swift, unpredictable movements of a swallow's tail during flight, involving a lightning-fast downward strike followed instantly by an upward cut designed to catch opponents who dodged the first attack. For a split second it nearly works. According to multiple sources, Kojiro's blade comes so close to Musashi's head that it allegedly severs his headband. Some accounts suggest Musashi may have taken a minor cut. The master of the Ganryu school comes within inches of victory, but psychological warfare had achieved its purpose. Kojiro's perfect technique, executed in rage rather than calm precision, creates just enough of an opening. Musashi's counterstrike with his wooden oar is devastating. Historical accounts describe him striking Kojiro's skull with a vertical blow, crushing it, and ending the duel instantly. The scene that follows reveals something crucial about Musashi's character. As Kojiro collapses onto the sand, dying or already dead, Musashi doesn't celebrate. Multiple accounts describe him bowing respectfully to his fallen opponent and to the official witnesses. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. According to some historical sources, Kojiro wasn't finished. With the last of his strength, he allegedly attempted one final strike at Musashi's legs. Musashi stepped back just enough to avoid the attack, then delivered a final blow to Kojiro's chest, allegedly breaking ribs that pierced his heart. The greatest technical swordsman in Japan dies on a beach, killed by a wooden stick carved from a boat oar. Musashi immediately retreats to his boat and is rowed away, but witnesses describe something troubling, tears in his eyes as he departed. This wasn't the reaction of a triumphant warrior, this was someone who realized he had destroyed something irreplaceable. But was this duel really about determining the greatest swordsman, or was something darker at play? Some modern historians, including scholars like Harada Mukashi, suggest a troubling alternative theory. According to this analysis, the Sasaki clan may have represented a political obstacle to Lord Hosokawa's ambitions. Defeating Kojiro wouldn't just eliminate a rival swordsman, it would remove a potential political threat and send a message to Hosokawa's religious and political opponents. Consider the timing and circumstances. The duel was arranged through Hosokawa's intermediary, on a remote island where Kojiro's supporters couldn't interfere, with Musashi using tactics that seemed designed not just to win, but to psychologically destroy his opponent. Some scholars argue this wasn't an honourable test of skill, it was a calculated assassination disguised as a duel. The evidence remains circumstantial, but it raises uncomfortable questions about the most famous sword fight in Japanese history. Was Musashi a master strategist or a hired killer? Was this a legendary duel or a political murder? What's historically documented is the profound change in Musashi after Ganryu Island. According to multiple sources, he immediately retired from lethal dueling. The man who had built his reputation on defeating and often killing opponents suddenly renounced death matches entirely. This wasn't normal behaviour for a victorious warrior in 1612 Japan. Winning such a high-profile duel should have opened doors to prestigious positions, wealthy patrons, and legendary status. Instead, Musashi essentially withdrew from the dueling world. His later writings suggest deep regret about the encounter. Unlike his detailed accounts of other fights, the Book of Five Rings makes no mention of Ganryu Island or Sasaki Kojiro. The most important duel of his life is completely absent from his own strategic manual. Think about that silence. A man who documented fighting techniques, strategies, and philosophies in meticulous detail refuses to discuss his greatest victory. What does that tell us about his state of mind? According to historical records, Musashi later described Kojiro as the strongest opponent he ever faced. Not the most skilled, not the most dangerous, the strongest. That word choice suggests respect, admiration, even sorrow for what was lost on that beach. The island itself bears witness to this moment's significance. Originally called Funashima, Boat Island, it was renamed Ganryu Island after Kojiro's fighting name. Think about that honour. The loser's name lives on while the winner's is forgotten in geography. Today, visitors can take a 10-minute ferry ride to walk where these two masters faced each other. The island remains largely unchanged, a small, flat piece of land with statues commemorating both warriors locked in eternal combat. The memorial depicts them in the split second before the fatal blow, preserving forever the moment when technical perfection met psychological strategy, when traditional honour confronted unconventional tactics, when Japan's greatest swordsman faced the one man who understood that winning mattered more than method. Over 4 centuries, the story of Ganryu Island has been told and retold countless times. Movies, novels, woodblock prints, and manga have transformed historical figures into mythic heroes, but each retelling moves further from documented facts toward dramatic fiction. Some modern scholars even question whether Sasaki Kojiro existed at all, citing limited primary sources and the possibility that he was a composite figure created from multiple historical swordsmen. But the emotional truth of the story transcends historical accuracy. It represents the eternal conflict between tradition and innovation, between technical mastery and strategic thinking, between fighting with honour and fighting to win. The duel also marked the end of an era. The age of wandering swordsmen testing their skills in lethal combat was giving way to a more stable society, where martial artists served established lords rather than seeking individual glory. Musashi's victory on Ganryu Island established his reputation as Japan's greatest swordsman, but it also began his transformation into something more complex: philosopher, artist, and strategic thinker. The man who had spent his youth perfecting the art of killing was about to spend his remaining decades exploring what it meant to truly master oneself. The psychological techniques that destroyed Kojiro would be refined into a comprehensive philosophy of strategy that influenced not just martial artists, but military leaders and business strategists for centuries. But first, he had to survive the immediate aftermath of his victory. Kojiro's students and supporters didn't simply accept their master's death. Some allegedly sought revenge, forcing Musashi to remain vigilant even in victory. The greatest duel in Japanese history was over, but its consequences were just beginning to unfold. Next, how Musashi transformed from a feared duelist into a respected strategist, artist, and philosopher, and why his final writings would influence leaders across cultures for over 400 years. April 1612. The most feared duelist in Japan walks away from Ganryu Island forever changed. But here's the remarkable part: Musashi doesn't celebrate his greatest victory. Instead, according to historical records, he immediately retired from lethal dueling. Think about how extraordinary this decision was. At 29 years old, Musashi had just defeated the most technically skilled swordsman in Japan. He could have leveraged this fame into any position he wanted. Instead, he essentially withdrew from the world that had made him legendary. For the next 21 years, historical sources document only one official duel. In 1634, at the arrangement of Lord Ogasawara, Musashi defeated a lance specialist named Takeda Matabei. One duel in over 2 decades. The man who had built his entire reputation on defeating opponents in combat was done with killing. But this wasn't a simple retirement. Musashi was transforming from a master of death into something much more complex, a strategic philosopher whose insights would influence leaders for centuries. In 1633, Musashi began staying with Hosokawa Tadatoshi, the daimyo of Kumamoto Castle. According to documented records, he came to train warriors and create art. But in 1637 to 1638, one final military challenge would test his strategic thinking on a scale unlike any duel. The Shimaba Rebellion erupted in southwestern Japan, a massive peasant uprising led by Catholic Christians, facing brutal taxation and religious persecution. Over 37,000 rebels, including many former samurai, fortified themselves in the ruins of Hara Castle. The Tokugawa shogunate responded with overwhelming force, 125,000 troops from multiple domains. Historical records confirm that Musashi was present in the besieging army, serving as a military advisor to Hosokawa Tadatoshi. But here's where Musashi's story takes an almost comical turn. According to multiple historical sources, including contemporary military records, the legendary swordsman was knocked off his horse by a stone thrown by a peasant rebel. This embarrassing moment represents one of the few verifiable records of him participating in an actual military campaign. Think about the irony. The man who had never lost a duel, who had psychologically dismantled Japan's greatest swordsman, gets unhorsed by a random peasant with a rock. It's a humbling reminder that even legends have their awkward moments. The siege dragged on for months. These weren't ordinary peasants. Many were led by well-trained former samurai who understood battlefield tactics. The rebels caused heavy casualties among the government forces until the castle finally fell on April 15, 1638. But military service was just one aspect of Musashi's new life. In 1640, he officially became a retainer of the Hosokawa lords of Kumamoto. According to the Niten Ki, he received from Lord Tadatoshi 17 retainers, a stipend of 300 koku, the rank of a kumigashira, and Chiba Castle in Kumamoto as his residence. This wasn't just employment, it was recognition as a gentleman samurai. The man who had spent decades as a wandering ronin now had an official position, servants, and a castle residence. But what makes this transformation remarkable is what Musashi chose to do with his newfound stability. Historical records show he pursued an extraordinary range of activities beyond swordsmanship, became accomplished in calligraphy, ink painting, sculpture, tea ceremony, and even garden design. Archaeological evidence suggests he may have contributed to the design of Akashi Castle. This wasn't unusual dilettantism. Musashi was systematically exploring the principle he would later write about. Mastery of one discipline could inform mastery of all others. The same mental precision required for perfect sword timing could be applied to brushstroke, strategic planning, or architectural design. In 1641, Musashi wrote his first major strategic work, the Hyoho Sanju Go, 35 Instructions on Strategy, for Hosokawa Tadatoshi. This document formed the foundation for his later masterpiece, and demonstrated that his strategic thinking had evolved far beyond personal combat. In 1642, according to historical records, Musashi suffered attacks of neuralgia, foreshadowing serious health problems. Sensing his mortality, he made a decision that would ensure his lasting influence. In 1643, he retired to a cave called Reigando to live as a hermit and complete his life's work. Reigando wasn't just any cave. Located in the mountains northwest of Kumamoto, it was part of a Zen temple complex that had been sacred for centuries. Legend claimed the area was once a dragon swampland before Chinese monk Torin Ayo built a temple there in the 14th century. For nearly 2 years, Musashi lived in this Spartan cave, meditating and writing. The contrast with his earlier life is striking. The man who had once never bathed to avoid vulnerability now embraced complete solitude and spiritual discipline. Here, in probably the most humble circumstances of his life, Musashi created his masterpiece, Gorin no Sho, the Book of Five Rings. The Book of Five Rings wasn't just a martial arts manual. Musashi organized his strategic philosophy around 5 elements: earth, water, fire, wind and void, each representing different aspects of conflict and mastery. The Earth Book established foundations and basic principles. The Water Book described his two-sword fighting style and fundamental techniques. The Fire Book addressed the heat of battle, timing, psychology and tactical adaptation. The Wind Book critiqued other martial arts schools. The Void Book explored the philosophical and spiritual aspects of true mastery. But here's what made the work revolutionary. Musashi wrote it as a universal strategy, not just sword fighting instruction. He explicitly stated that understanding one discipline deeply would reveal the underlying principles of all disciplines. This wasn't abstract philosophy. Musashi was documenting specific psychological and strategic techniques that he had tested in life or death situations. His insights about timing, distancing, psychological warfare, and adaptability applied whether you were facing a sword opponent or navigating complex political situations. Historical analysis suggests Musashi understood something profound. The mental state required for perfect performance was the same whether you were wielding a sword, writing calligraphy, or leading armies. Mastery was ultimately about mind, not technique. Alongside the Book of Five Rings, Musashi wrote another work that revealed his spiritual evolution, Dokudo, the Path of Aloneness. This shorter text contained 21 precepts for living as a warrior philosopher. The principles were stark and uncompromising. Accept everything just the way it is. Do not seek pleasure for its own sake. Do not depend on a partial feeling. Think lightly of yourself and deeply of the world. Be detached from desire your whole life long. These weren't the words of a young duelist seeking fame and victory. This was a 60-year-old man who had achieved everything possible through martial prowess and discovered that true strength came from something deeper than technique. According to historical records, Musashi completed both works and gave the manuscripts to Terao Maganojo, his closest disciple, just 7 days before his death. He finished the Book of Five Rings in the second month of 1645 and died on June 13, 1645. Contemporary accounts describe his final moments with characteristic precision. He had himself raised up, tightened his belt, positioned his wakizashi properly, and seated himself with one knee raised, holding his sword in his left hand and a cane in his right. He died in perfect warrior posture, maintaining discipline until his final breath. What makes Musashi's story remarkable isn't just his undefeated record in dueling, it's his transformation from a killing machine into a profound strategic thinker whose insights transcended his era. The Book of Five Rings has been continuously studied for over 380 years. When it was first translated into English in 1974, it became required reading for business executives trying to understand Japanese management techniques. Modern military strategists study his psychological warfare methods. Martial artists worldwide still practice principles he developed. But perhaps most importantly, Musashi demonstrated that true mastery requires evolution. The young man who solved problems by beating opponents to death became the elder, who understood that the greatest victories were won before physical conflict ever began. His two-sword fighting style, developed from necessity during the Yoshioka ambush, became a complete martial philosophy emphasizing adaptability, mental flexibility, and the integration of seemingly opposing forces. The strategic principles he learned from individual combat, timing, distancing, psychological manipulation, reading opponents, proved applicable to military campaigns, political negotiations, and business competition across cultures and centuries. Today, Musashi's influence extends far beyond martial arts. His emphasis on continuous learning, mental preparation, and strategic thinking resonates with everyone from athletes to entrepreneurs to military planners. The cave where he wrote his masterpiece Ragando remains a pilgrimage site for those seeking to understand how discipline, solitude, and deep reflection can transform raw talent into timeless wisdom. But Musashi's greatest lesson might be his willingness to continuously reinvent himself. He began as an orphan child with a talent for violence, became a feared duelist, evolved into a respected strategist, and finally transformed into a philosopher whose insights outlasted his sword. Next up, how Musashi's strategic principles influenced everything from World War II military planning to modern corporate strategy, and why his teachings about the warrior mindset remain relevant in an age when most battles are fought with ideas rather than swords. 1974. American business executives are struggling to understand why Japanese companies are dominating global markets. Then something extraordinary happens. The Book of Five Rings appears in English for the first time. Within months, this 17th century samurai manual becomes required reading in corporate boardrooms across America. Think about how remarkable this is. A text written by a hermit in a cave 330 years earlier suddenly becomes the key to understanding modern Japanese business strategy. According to documented sources, Western executives discovered that Japanese management techniques weren't just cultural differences, they were applications of strategic principles that Musashi had systematized centuries before. The timing wasn't coincidental. This was the height of Japan's economic miracle. American car manufacturers were being outmaneuvered by Toyota and Honda. Electronics companies couldn't compete with Sony and Panasonic. Business leaders were desperate to understand what they were missing. What they found in Musashi's writings was a complete philosophy of competitive strategy that transcended individual techniques. His central insight, that mastering one discipline deeply reveals universal principles applicable to any field, provided the missing piece of the puzzle. But Musashi's influence extended far beyond business. Military strategists studying his work discovered principles that remain devastatingly effective in modern warfare, even when weapons and tactics had evolved beyond anything a 17th century swordsman could imagine. His emphasis on psychological warfare, timing, and reading opponents proved applicable whether you were facing a single duelist or commanding armies. The concept of getting your opponent to move first became foundational in everything from fighter pilot training to special operations planning. Consider his teaching about fighting multiple opponents. When you fight one man, it is the same as fighting 10,000 men. When you can fight 10,000 men, you can fight one man. Modern military doctrine reflects this scalability principle. The same mental discipline required for individual combat effectiveness applies to unit leadership and strategic planning. Historical analysis reveals that Musashi's insights about adaptability and improvisation influenced military thinking in ways that weren't always explicitly acknowledged. His principle of using whatever weapons were available, demonstrated when he carved that ore into a bokken, became standard doctrine for unconventional warfare. The psychological tactics he pioneered, like deliberately arriving late to unsettle opponents, evolved into sophisticated deception strategies. Military planners recognized that the mental game often determined outcomes before physical conflict ever began. What makes Musashi's work extraordinary isn't just its practical applications, it's the underlying philosophy that connects individual mastery to universal truth. His famous principle, "From one thing, know 10,000 things," wasn't just martial arts wisdom, it was a blueprint for excellence in any field. According to historical records and modern analysis, this principle explains why the Book of Five Rings resonates across completely different disciplines. The mental state required for perfect sword technique, complete awareness, instantaneous response, freedom from hesitation, is identical to what artists call flow state, what athletes call being in the zone, and what business leaders call strategic intuition. Musashi understood something profound. Expertise in any domain requires the same fundamental qualities. Whether you're executing a perfect brushstroke, closing a crucial business deal, or making a split-second tactical decision, the underlying mental discipline is identical. This explains why his teachings have been successfully applied to fields he never imagined. Modern research in neuroscience and psychology has validated many of his insights about mental preparation, timing, and the integration of conscious planning with unconscious execution. His emphasis on continuous learning and adaptation anticipated what modern thinkers call growth mindset. His rejection of rigid technique in favor of flexible response predicted the failure of bureaucratic organizations when facing rapid change. To understand Musashi's modern influence, you need to understand how his philosophy shaped 20th century Japan. When the country rebuilt after World War II, business leaders drew heavily on traditional strategic thinking. including principles that trace directly back to Musashi's writings. According to documented sources, Japanese executives didn't just study Western business methods, they integrated them with indigenous strategic thinking that emphasized long-term planning, attention to detail, and the importance of understanding your competitive environment completely. Musashi's concept of knowing your enemy better than they know themselves became fundamental to Japanese market research and competitive intelligence. His emphasis on preparation and mental discipline influenced quality control systems that made Made in Japan synonymous with excellence. The principle of continuous improvement, Kaizen, reflects Musashi's teaching that mastery is never finished, that even experts must continue learning and adapting. His rejection of complacency and emphasis on constant vigilance became embedded in Japanese corporate culture. The famous Japanese attention to seemingly minor details, what Western observers sometimes dismissed as perfectionism, actually reflected Musashi's teaching that small advantages compound into decisive superiority. His principle, pay attention to the smallest things and the largest things, became standard practice in Japanese manufacturing, but Musashi's influence wasn't limited to Japan. As the Book of Five Rings spread globally, it began influencing strategic thinking across cultures and industries. Modern strategic planning incorporates concepts that can be traced directly to his writings, even when planners don't realize the connection. His emphasis on adaptability over rigid planning influenced everything from military doctrine to startup methodology. The concept of pivoting in response to changing conditions, now considered essential in business and technology, reflects his teaching about water-like flexibility. Musashi's insight that timing is everything became foundational in fields from financial markets to product launches. His detailed analysis of different types of timing, fast timing, slow timing, interval timing, provided frameworks that modern strategists still use. His principle of cutting at the moment your opponent decides to cut evolved into sophisticated theories about preemption and first-mover advantage. Whether you're launching a product ahead of competitors or anticipating market shifts, the underlying logic remains identical. The concept of ordered flexibility, having strong fundamental principles while remaining adaptable in execution, became central to successful organizations facing rapid change. Musashi's integration of discipline with innovation provided a model for balancing structure with responsiveness. What makes Musashi's legacy remarkable isn't just practical influence, it's the spiritual and philosophical framework that continues to resonate across cultures. Musashi wasn't just a fighter or a thinker. He combined art, war, and self-discipline into a complete way of life, and that's why his legacy still matters. Modern readers discover in his writings a complete approach to living that emphasizes presence, purpose, and continuous growth. His famous precepts from The Path of Aloneness, accept everything just the way it is, do not seek pleasure for its own sake, think lightly of yourself and deeply of the world, provide guidance for anyone seeking meaning beyond material success. His demonstration that the highest levels of achievement require integration of mind, body, and spirit influenced everything from sports psychology to leadership development. The concept of warrior mindset, complete commitment combined with emotional detachment from outcomes, became standard in high-performance training across fields. Musashi's example of reinventing himself throughout his life, from violent youth to master duelist to strategic philosopher to artistic creator, provides a template for continuous personal evolution. His willingness to abandon what made him successful in order to grow towards something greater resonates with anyone facing major life transitions. His insistence on direct experience over theoretical knowledge anticipated modern emphasis on experiential learning and authentic expertise. His rejection of empty tradition in favor of practical effectiveness influenced approaches to innovation and problem-solving. As we reach the end of Musashi's story, we're left with profound questions about what it means to achieve true mastery. His life demonstrates that excellence isn't just about technique, it's about the character and wisdom developed through facing ultimate challenges. Musashi's transformation from a young man who solved problems through violence into an elder who understood that the greatest victories happen before conflict begins offers lessons for our own times. In an era when many conflicts seem intractable, his example suggests that the most powerful weapon isn't force, but the wisdom to see situations clearly and respond appropriately. His integration of Eastern philosophy with practical effectiveness provides a bridge between different ways of understanding success. While Western culture often emphasizes individual achievement and material progress, Musashi's example shows how personal excellence can serve larger purposes. The principles he developed, complete preparation, mental clarity, adaptive response, ethical grounding, remain as relevant today as they were 400 years ago. Whether you're facing a business challenge, personal crisis, or creative project, the fundamental requirements for excellence remain unchanged. His legacy reminds us that true mastery requires more than technical skill. It demands the courage to face our limitations honestly, the discipline to continue learning throughout life, and the wisdom to use our abilities in the service of something greater than ourselves. The legendary swordsman who never lost a duel ultimately discovered that the most important battles are fought within ourselves, against our own fears, limitations, and attachments. His greatest victory wasn't defeating Sasaki Kojiro with a wooden sword, but transforming from a master of death into a teacher of life. Today, in a world where physical duels have been replaced by competition in business, technology, and ideas, Miyamoto Musashi's teachings remain a guide for anyone seeking to excel while maintaining their humanity. The Sword Saint's greatest lesson might be this: true strength comes not from defeating others, but from mastering ourselves. If you've made it this far, you've already shown the kind of discipline Musashi would respect. Now ask yourself, where in your life are you still swinging wildly? And where can you start cutting with precision? If this hit you hard, share it, comment below, and let me know what part of Musashi's journey spoke to you most. And if you want more stories like this, more ancient wisdom with modern relevance, let me know. Should I go deeper into Musashi's legacy? Or is there someone else you want me to cover next? Drop your ideas in the comments.